Thank you to our sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Build accessible, powerful WordPress forms with Gravity Forms. Flexible tools for creators, developers, and teams of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, WP Engine. WP Engine provides the most relied upon and trusted WordPress products for businesses, brands, and agencies of all sizes. Platinum sponsor, Woo. WooCommerce is the open-source e-commerce platform built on WordPress, helping merchants worldwide sell, manage, and grow their businesses. Gold sponsors, Ally Web Accessibility. Equalize Digital, websites for everyone. GoDaddy, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Yoast. Silver sponsors, Aardvark, CodeGeek, Your Vision, Our Talent, One Team, Kinetic Iris, Kinsta, Pressable, Second Melody. Bronze sponsors, Nine Planets Hosting, Engage, Draw Attention, Multidots, NerdPress, OSAM Studio, AusEY, Australian Web Accessibility Initiative, Progress Planner, Quality Logic, Sharp, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Stellar WP, Termageddon, WebYes.
Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2025. My name is Annabelle Drum. I'm a knitwear designer with Drumroll Knitwear. Thank you for joining us for the presentation Real Inclusion, How to Run Insightful and Respectful User Testing with Disabled People, with Lucy Collins. Lucy is owner of Web Usability, a specialist user research and accessibility consultancy. She's passionate about giving people the evidence they need to create digital experiences that work for all. With a decade of experience in the UX space, her mission is to prioritize the needs of users to create online experiences that are accessible, functional, and enjoyable for users. She's a vocal advocate for the importance of digital accessibility and ensuring the online world works for everyone. In her time at Web Usability, she's developed a robust accessibility service, harnessing inclusive user research and working with many organizations to embed accessibility in their processes and practices. She shares much of her experience as host of the Web Usability podcast, where she also has the pleasure of interviewing and learning from a range of inspiring guests who generously share their lived experiences of disability and neurodivergence. Please feel free to add your questions to the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. And use chat to connect to other attendees. Welcome, Lucy.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me today for my talk, Real Inclusion, How to Run Insightful and Respectful User Testing with Disabled People. It is bright and early here in the UK, 8 o'clock. I know that we hopefully have some people joining us from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world and listening into this. So let's just start with a little introduction. An introduction of myself to begin with. My name is Lucy Collins. I am a white woman with blonde hair in my mid-30s, and today I'm wearing a bright orange jumper because there's nothing like bright colours to get us started in the morning. I run an organisation called Web Usability. We are a user research and accessibility consultancy based in the UK. The organisation was founded by my own mum and dad 23 years ago at a time when UX was very much in its infancy. And I now continue their legacy with the vision of creating an equitable online world that works for everyone. We are a small but specialist team of researchers who surface what it is that customers need from an online experience and then test to optimize those experiences. And we are really passionate about digital inclusion and work with organizations across sectors to try and remove the barriers that allow for full online participation. And this is why I'm here today. I'm here today to talk to you about running insightful and respectful user testing sessions with disabled and neurodivergent people. I've been a researcher now for coming up to about 8 years, and I've run sessions with many hundreds of users who have a diverse range of access needs. I always like to say at the beginning of things like this that I myself do not have a disability, but I'm driven to advocate in this space for my mum and the 16 billion people worldwide like her who have a registered disability. So my mum is one of the people pictured here in this photo. This is my team, as you can see, small but perfectly formed with many, many canine friends. And my mum and dad, who flank me on either side of the team here, are really kind of my inspiration. And certainly my mum is the reason that I feel very passionate to advocate for good, inclusive online experiences. For me, growing up with a disabled parent, I saw daily the way that society was not yet set up to meet her needs. And if I can break down just some of the barriers that she faces to ensure she can live a full and independent life, then I feel I will have done some good in the world. So onwards. For the next half an hour or so, I'm going to try and distill everything that I know about running inclusive user testing so that you too can feel confident to run inclusive testing sessions with disabled and neurodivergent people. Let's start with a definition. And I flicked onto this slide briefly as I was trying to get my PowerPoint driving skills under control there. So you got a bit of a glimpse as to what was coming next. But yeah, let's start with a definition. It might sound obvious, but I think it's really important for us to all be on the same page by what do we actually mean by inclusive user testing. So, as you can see from what's just appeared on the screen here, inclusive user testing is the process of involving disabled people with a diverse range of access needs, including disabled people, and others often excluded from mainstream research in the evaluation of digital products or services. These are effectively what people might have historically called edge cases, but it's not a term that we like to use because really we're talking about a really important sector of society. 16 billion people worldwide. In the UK alone, it's 25% of the UK population that have a registered disability. These are not edge cases. This is a huge portion of the world. And so what we want to do, and the goal of inclusive user testing, is to understand how well a product works for everyone and not just the average user. When we do inclusive user testing, we are valuing lived experience as essential expertise, not as a niche perspective. We are showing that we care about all of our customers and users, and in the end, build a service that works better for everyone. Inclusive user testing can take place at any stage of the digital development process. And the recommendation, or my recommendation certainly, is always that earlier is better. We have tested, and you can test prototypes, beta sites, live sites, marketing campaigns, really anything that goes online. Although you might need to adopt some different approaches depending on what it is that you're testing. But it is all testable. And so often we hear the excuse that, oh, we'll get to it later. Well, actually, I would always challenge you to be thinking in an accessible first way and thinking about how you can incorporate inclusive user testing into your development cycles as early and as regularly as possible. On the whole, we prefer to run moderated user testing with people when working with disabled people. So this is where a researcher will sit in with the participant while they engage with an online journey. They will observe what they do, their behaviors, and sometimes question in real time to understand what they're thinking and how the participant is feeling. So this is where we're digging into their attitudes. The reason we prefer this approach is because you can respond dynamically to the individual needs of a participant. You can clarify instructions if at any point they are unclear. You can troubleshoot tech issues, which is especially common when you are running remote testing sessions. And you can adapt your approach as you're struggling, or if the participant is struggling. You can really kind of lean into the rapport that you as a researcher will build up with your participant to ensure that they can fully participate in the session. You can, of course, do user testing in an unmoderated fashion, whereby you give people an online journey and you give them a scenario or a task to complete, and you ask them to self-report on the experience that they're having. It might be a better approach for some neurodivergent and disabled people who find certain forms of social interaction challenging. However, if you moderate your sessions with respect and empathy, and we're going to explore how we do that later in the session, then the moderated approach, in my opinion, is the best approach. And it's certainly the approach that we're going to be focusing on mostly today. Why? Why should you do it? I'm hoping, given this is an accessibility conference, that this isn't a point that I'm going to have to labor too much. But I do think it's important for us to have the language, to have the justification for doing inclusive user testing, so that when we go back to our teams and say, hey, this is something that I would like to plan into our roadmap, we can justify why it's so important. The first, and I think most important point to hammer home in the session today is that WCAG compliance does not necessarily equal full accessibility. So WCAG, which I'm sure almost everybody on this call will be familiar with, is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They are the benchmark for good, accessible digital experiences, but they are the floor and not the ceiling of what we should be aiming to achieve when it comes to digital accessibility. For many, WCAG compliance checks is a great starting point. It really is. And I'm a fan of WCAG. I think there's a lot of people in the accessibility space that feel that WCAG doesn't do as much as it should. And it doesn't. But for anybody trying to get into digital accessibility, it is a great place to start. So I would always recommend getting there, getting to a WCAG compliance as the floor. But it is just the starting point. It is not where we should be finishing our accessibility efforts. Often, if things are simply WCAG compliant, it might result in a service meeting an accessibility standard on paper, yet remain frustratingly unusable in practice for people who have disabilities. Let's take a couple of examples of that. So WCAG does very little to address the needs of speech recognition software users. So Dragon Naturally Speaking is one of the most common speech recognition softwares available on the market today. It doesn't work well with drop-downs. It's just a limitation of that technology. We've tested this hundreds and hundreds of times, and we've seen repeatedly that drop-downs and Dragon are not good friends. But you could have a drop-down that is perfectly marked up, that has all the right labels, that's associated correctly with those labels, and it will work well for a screen reader user. It might work well for a visually impaired user, and it might work well for someone who's neurodivergent or has a cognitive impairment. But it probably won't work well for a Dragon user. And that is a limitation of WCAG. If we were to test that experience with a Dragon user, you would quite quickly see that it's not a good accessible solution. And it might be that actually a checkbox component is going to be better than a drop-down in that situation. It's quite a specific one and quite minor, but it's the sort of thing that if that drop-down is an essential field in a form and somebody with Dragon can't complete it, then you've immediately got a completely inaccessible experience. By addressing barriers early, it's also going to save you money, and it probably might even make you some money. So this is the second reason why to do it. And this is a really compelling argument for anybody that's driven by the bottom line, by return on investment. If I'm going to do this, what's that going to look like for my bottom line? Well, the great thing is that fixing accessibility issues in the development has been estimated to be up to 10 times cheaper than doing it after launch. So if we're ironing out as many barriers as possible during that development phase, and as I've already just said, WCAG compliance does not mean we're going to be ironing out all those barriers. By including a round or two of inclusive user testing in that development process, you're going to be fixing those issues, fixing those barriers when they're going to be quicker and easier to fix. And you're also then not going to accumulate UX debt or accessibility debt. And this is what happens when something gets launched with a whole bunch of accessibility or usability issues. That debt builds up. And just like any debt, financial debt, it gets harder to pay off the longer that it sits around for. It compounds, it accumulates. And so it's a lot quicker and easier if we fix those issues during development. We also know that companies that invest in inclusion can make money. A study by Accenture indicates that companies with stronger disability inclusion practices achieve 1.6 times more revenue, 2.6 times more net income, and 2 times more economic profit compared to less inclusive peers. Now, this isn't just limited to inclusion in the digital space. This is kind of broader inclusion. We're looking at recruitment practices, we're looking at staff wellness practices. But the point stands that an investment in inclusion is an investment in the long-term success of any organization or brand. So for those that are motivated by the bottom line, this can be a really compelling argument. You are going to learn so much. We always encourage our clients to observe inclusive user testing live where we've got the permission from the participant. It is a truly eye-opening and enlightening experience. Watching any sort of research helps to challenge the mental model that we all have about how the world works. Our experiences, our idea of what is normal is going to be dictated by the life that we've led, the experiences that we've had up until that date. But they are unique to us. Nobody else has had our lived experience. And the most amazing thing about observing lived experience testing, inclusive user testing, is that just momentarily you get to walk in that person's shoes and you get to experience the frustrations and the barriers that are put in their way. This is the biggest motivator for change. Let's take a screen reader user, for example. If you've never seen a screen reader in action, or someone who's a power screen reader user navigating a website, then the number of times I've come out of a session and debriefed with the client afterward, and they've just gone, wow, that was incredible. Because of our ableist attitudes, we have these biases about what we think disabled people can achieve online. They are almost always incorrect. And we work with lots of really fantastic blind individuals who use screen readers at a phenomenal rate. They will be able to navigate a website quicker than I can as a sighted user, because they have their screen reader set to 4, 5, 6 times normal speaking rate, to the point where, I cannot understand necessarily always what it's saying, but they're so tuned into their screen reader, they're so at one with the piece of technology, that they are able to navigate a website so fast if it's set up correctly for them. But also it falls down so quickly when a button is missing a label, or a form field is missing a proper programmatic markup, or there's no heading structure on the page that helps them get a sense of how all the content fits together. The same is true, the feeling of pain when you see a speech recognition software. And this is a scenario that has happened for us when we've been testing someone who is a passionate gamer, who has spinal muscular atrophy, very limited use of his arms, but he loves to game. It's still a thing that he is able to do. It brings him such joy. Being on one of his favorite websites and wanting to buy a game that has been on his bucket list for a while, he was then unable to buy it because the buy button didn't work with his speech recognition software. Such a simple issue, but so important. And this is why I say observe these sessions and do them in the first place, because you will learn a lot. And the final thing to say is that you will create a better digital experience for everyone. It is a well-established fact that when you build accessible experiences, you build experiences that work better for everyone. Access is the core of universal design. It's what everything is built around. So baking it in from the very start will ensure that we create experiences that are better for businesses and customers. And what's not to like about that? So what am I going to cover off? Quite a long introduction in the end, but what am I going to cover off for the next half an hour or so? So we're going to start with who to involve, how to ensure that we are being well representative in the sample that we choose. We're going to talk about where to find people and make sure that we're finding the right people for the testing sessions. We're going to talk about how we recruit those people in a kind, empathetic, and ethical manner to ensure that they can fully participate in the sessions. We're going to make sure that we're setting up for success. We're going to look at our moderation techniques. As I said, I'm going to be focusing today on moderated user testing sessions, and I want to ensure that I'm equipping you with the right skills to be able to moderate those sessions, again, so people can fully participate in the testing. We're going to talk about how we follow up with testers following the testing itself. And we're just going to touch on some of the common mistakes that I typically see and how hopefully we can avoid them. So to dive in, when we think about who we want to involve, we want to ensure that we're being fully representative and not tokenistic in our representation. And often clients will approach me and say, oh, we would like to have one blind person, one visually impaired person, we'd like someone with a physical disability. And it feels a bit checkbox. It feels a bit like we're trying to tick off the conditions. And because we are very focused on looking at the world through the social model of disability, the idea that people are disabled by society and not by their medical condition, we quite like to move the emphasis away from the disability that somebody has and focus more on the input and output need that they have. So not just types of users. And by this, I mean input, what do we do? And output, what do we perceive? So when we focus on this modality, we focus on the moment of interaction rather than the medical diagnosis that somebody has. So let's take an example from the input column. So what we do, my mum, who has a physical disability, yes, she's got multiple sclerosis, but actually that's not the information that you need as a website designer, developer, content writer need to know about her. What you need to know is that she has limited mobility in her hands and she relies on a speech input most of the time to control her computer and her phone. So her input method is voice or speech. Her output method, however, is visual, or in fact, it's probably multimodal because she has her eyesight is fine, her hearing is fine. So she's going to be looking for things that she can both see and hear. Let's take one of our blind testers, for example. So they would be using a screen reader. Their input is going to be keyboard because they're using their keyboard to control their screen reader and navigate around a website. But their output is going to be audio. They need to be able to hear everything about a website, the structure, the content, the images, the videos, whatever else it might be. It all needs to be done in audio content. This approach of thinking about input and output helps us identify where designs fail real people in real situations. And we can ensure inclusivity for all users, regardless of what condition or identity they might have. The nice thing about thinking about it in this approach is that it allows us to test for all of the various different intersectional combinations of disability and access need that might exist in the world. So instead of saying someone with a disability needs this, we can ask, what if someone doesn't have use of both hands right now? What do they do? And as I say, this could be someone like my mum. It could be someone who's had a stroke. It could be someone who's tetraplegic. It could be someone with a limb difference. But it could also be me when I'm holding my baby. I'm a mum of two, and I'm quite often doing things one-handed. It could be someone standing on a metro and an underground and holding on for dear life with one hand. So the great thing about this approach is that actually what we're going to be doing is designing better for everybody rather than focusing on certain disabilities. Typically, when we think about the sample size of who we are testing with, the wonderful thing about qualitative research, which is what this is that you don't need big sample sizes to get some really valuable, robust insight. So we might be looking to test with somewhere between 5 and 12 users on an average session. And within that, you can normally get a good variety across this input and output diversity that we're looking for. So you might end up with someone who relies on keyboard navigation and as an input and has an audio output. In this case, it could be a screen reader user. You might have somebody who relies on a voice input, but can have a multimodal output. So like my mum, speech recognition software user, but with sight and hearing. It might be somebody who relies on touch, a Braille user for both input and output, perhaps. So you're having that tactile output as well as a touch input. Could be someone who uses an eye tracking or gaze technology, again, because of a physical disability that limits their use of their limbs. And again, they might then be requiring an auditory output or a visual only one. So we really like this model. We really like this approach of thinking about who we're going to involve. And we think that this moves people away from fairly tokenistic representation, which is one of the kind of biggest pitfalls that we see in this world. Let's talk about where to find people, because this is one of the common barriers to not doing inclusive user testing that we hear all the time. Oh, we don't know how to reach people with disabilities. I always think that this is a really, really bad excuse, because globally 16% of the of the global population have a registered disability. That's an awful lot of people. In the UK alone, as I said, I think it's 24%, which is about 16 million people who have a disability in the UK alone. All I say to people in this situation is that we might just need to work a little bit harder or alter our approaches to meet those people where they are rather than expecting them to come to us. So where can we find them? Firstly, your customer base. I don't know what sorts of organizations we've got sitting in and listening today, but I bet a lot of you have got customers, and I bet a lot of your customers might have disabilities. Bear in mind that 80% of disabilities are not visible. Not everybody's going to feel comfortable to disclose the fact that they have a disability to you, and that's absolutely fine. But it is a great place to start, is reaching out to your customer base, inquiring in an empathetic and ethical manner, which we will come on to, whether or not anybody would be willing to support you in your website development, and then building up a bit of a pool of people that you can go back to regularly, a community of people who you can work with and co-create inclusive outcomes. Charities and advocacy groups. There's all sorts of fantastic organizations all around the world doing amazing things with people who have a whole range of access needs. They are often a fantastic conduit, a fantastic facilitator at giving you introductions to people. Again, when we get onto how to recruit well, we'll talk about the details that should be shared with these organizations, ensuring that it's upfront, it's explicit, and clear as possible. But these, again, are often a fantastic group of people to reach out to if you've got any concerns, or if you're looking to speak to a particular audience group. Let's say you want to speak to stroke survivors. There are stroke organizations, in the UK alone, we've got a couple, and got no doubt that there's many all around the world. There will be all sorts of people that they can facilitate introductions to, community groups that they're working with. And it provides a kind of a safe introduction, a warm introduction, if you say, if you want to say, that will ensure, hopefully, that you get a better response rate to your recruitment efforts. Social media can be a fantastic place to find people. So we will quite often run social media ads to try and build up our pool of people that we're testing with. We'll often be looking for people from specific communities, specific backgrounds. This allows us to reach them where they are, rather than expecting them to come to us and find our information. So social media, and you might just want to think about the channel that you're using, which will depend on the demographic of people that you're reaching. You might want to think about the method of reaching those people. Running ads can be effective, but there is a sense of distrust sometimes around those ads. So you just want to make sure that with the content that we're putting out in those ads, we're building up as much confidence and trust as possible, linking back to you and the credibility that you have as an organization, to ensure that people realize that this is a legitimate offer and something that they can trust. Specialist recruitment agencies, there are obviously a lot of people working in this space already. We have an in-house recruitment team that I rely on very heavily, or we do all of our recruitment through. But there are agencies out there that just specialize in participant recruitment for user research, market research. And a lot of them, if not all of them, hopefully, should have specialities about approaching and managing people who have disabilities and neurodivergence. Finally, I've got the option of your staff. I've quite deliberately put this at the end of this slide because this is not a group that I would suggest that you are necessarily relying on. The reason I say that is that, firstly, these people are already doing a job for you. And given the way that the world is these days, no doubt they're already at capacity. Our expected outputs in this day and age are enormous, And so if you're then adding an additional load on top of these people to not only do their job, but also help you test some products, then that might be a step too far. And the last thing that we want to do is put unnecessary pressure, unnecessary stress that could lead to burnout or fatigue that impacts them long term. However, having said that, a lot of organizations have community networks, have a disabled champions network internally. They might be a great place to start. Reach out to your disabled champions network if it exists, or to key individuals who have disclosed and are comfortable talking about their disability, and ask them how they feel you could get insight and involvement from the disabled community that exists within your staff network. If you are going to engage them in any sort of testing, ensure this is factored into their existing workload. Don't give this to them as a job in addition to what they're already doing, and make sure they're paid appropriately. We're going to come on to what that looks like in just a moment. So how do we recruit well? Firstly, and most importantly, it's about clarity, setting out the process in full. So what this looks like for us is a summary of the website that we might be testing. We don't necessarily give away the client or who we're working for, but we'll reference the sector they might be operating in, or the type of business that they are. So for example, we're currently doing a project for Disney. We're not telling people that we're testing for Disney, but we're telling people that we're testing a family holiday. So a family holiday website. So they have a sense of what's to come. We then include the exact dates and time slots so people can be very clear on the commitment that is required from them. We'll tell them about the logistics. Is it in person? Is it remote? So for in-person testing, we'll always try to have a venue secured before recruitment begins, so we can give people that address and they can understand the burden, the time commitment that's required of them to reach that venue. We'll include relevant accessibility details, including obviously kind of wheelchair access, but also if there's any other additional things that might help them ensure that the venue feels comfortable and appropriate for them. For remote testing, we will cover off the technology requirements, and as always, try to keep this as simple as possible. So Typically, our remote testing setup requires just a computer with access to the internet. If we're doing mobile testing, we might ask people to have a smartphone to hand, but we try and keep that as simple as possible. We'll include details of how the session will run. So the fact that they will be joined by a researcher who will be there to support them through the session. We'll tell them that there's going to be an introductory period, and then there's going to be some time where they are asked to use a website as if they're in their own home doing it. We'll tell them that the session is going to be recorded and what's going to be done with their data. And we'll also tell them whether or not the session is going to be observed. So as I said before, we really encourage our clients to observe these sessions in real time, to sort of feel the pain of testers and feel that and really experience the barriers that they might be facing online. But we always give our participants the option to be observed or not. Some people don't always feel comfortable doing it, but where possible, we will encourage it, and we'll always make sure that they are alerted to the fact that observers might be present ahead of time. We'll also just cover off payment. We'll tell them how much they're going to get paid, and we'll tell them when they can expect to receive that payment and the method through which they are going to receive it. So again, we're really upfront and transparent about all the details. Hopefully a fairly obvious one, but we want to ensure that all communications that we send out are clear and accessible. So we do a lot of our outreach via email, although we also follow that up with phone and some face-to-face stuff as required, depending on the group of people that we are trying to recruit. When it comes to email campaigns, make sure they're accessible. If you're including links in your email campaigns, we don't want to see just click here or read more. We want a nice descriptive link, text link that's going to tell them where to go. You might need to include a screener, a form effectively that allows you to see whether or not these are going to be the right people for you. If that is the case, and then make sure that form itself is accessible. We are going to be allowing people to self-describe. So allow them to tell you how they talk about their own disability. So some of our testers, for example, who have sight loss will call themselves blind. Others will say they're visually impaired. Others might say that they're non-sighted. It's up to them to self-describe. And finally, we want to make sure that we are asking people and not assuming anything about their condition or adjustments that they need. When in doubt, ask rather than assume, because the assumption is where you're likely to go wrong. I have got a slide dedicated to this because it is so important that we pay our participants. People should not be asked to do testing for free. You are gaining invaluable knowledge regarding their lived experience, and they deserve to be remunerated appropriately. What this will be will vary a bit depending on the length of the session, where you are in the world, and the complexity of the testing. As an example, we typically pay our testers anywhere between £70 and £150, depending again on the length of session and what it is that we're asking of them. Make sure that the payment happens promptly, and make sure it's through a method that works for the testers. So that might be a BACS transfer, a bank transfer, it might be PayPal, it might be another option. But make sure that that is clear and transparent right from the beginning, and that payment is a non-negotiable. All right, let's talk about how we're going to set up for success. So planning is absolutely critical to the success of user testing in any situation, but even more so when working with disabled and neurodivergent people. Some tasks might take you longer to complete, others might be quicker. You might need to factor in breaks or unexpected pauses. So be realistic about what you can cover off in a session. This comes a little bit with trial and error over time and depends a lot on the user journeys that you're testing. So if in doubt, run a couple of test sessions before you get into the meat of your testing, so that you can be sure you're using your time wisely. Ahead of your sessions, we want to understand the adjustments that our participants might need. So if in person, how will they get to you? What information do they need in advance to feel confident that they can attend the space in a good frame of mind? If remote, what tech setup will they need, and have you communicated this? Are captions enabled? Do you need to bring in a BSL interpreter? Are there any disclosed triggers that could be avoided, such as moving content or maximal contrast? If you're unsure about any of this, as said previously, ask, don't assume. And finally, it might be useful to set up a test session, particularly when you're doing remote testing with people. It might not be necessary for everybody, but if anybody is showing any kind of concern or hesitation about what's required of them, just spend 5-10 minutes joining a Zoom call or a Teams call, whatever system that you're using, talk them through the process, make sure they feel comfortable about the technology that they're going to need at their end to ensure that they can get comfortably settled into the session, and you are going to be getting the most out of the research. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about our moderation techniques, because really the reason I recommend moderated testing is because this is where you're going to get the most deep, rich insight out of your testing sessions. Building trust as quickly as possible is the thing that will make or break a research session. Rapport, rapport, rapport. And this will depend a little bit. You might have to adapt your approach depending on who you've got. So for example, if I'm doing a remote testing session with someone who's blind, I'm going to be using a lot more vocal cues to let them know that I'm listening and that I understand what they're saying, and that they are, and to keep them going. If it's a deaf person, I might be using a bit more body language. I might be sort of articulating things in a slightly different way. And for certain neurodivergence, I might take time to repeat key details or slow down what I'm saying to ensure that it's really, really registering with them as we're going through the session. Reiterate those session details. So they will have been told everything up front during that recruitment process, but take time at the beginning of the session to reiterate those details and make sure that everybody is clear and happy with what the session is going to look like before you get started. I had one experience, and as you probably have gathered from the way I'm delivering this presentation, I do sometimes speak a little bit quickly, especially if I'm a bit excited or a little bit nervous, as I definitely was at the beginning of this. And so what I always try and do as well is slow things down, because I have had feedback, particularly from neurodivergent testers, that sometimes they find that the speed at which I speak to them overwhelming. So take time to slow it down and give people these details slowly and clearly. Create space. Be comfortable to sit in silence and quietly observe. Some disabled users might need longer to process information and comprehend it. So give them this time. Don't jump in with a follow-up question or interrupt their thinking process. Allow them to work through the journey. But where it feels appropriate, if you haven't heard from them in a little while, gently prompt, how does this make you feel? What's your reaction to this? How clear or otherwise do you find this content? There's lots of ways that we can ensure not everybody's going to be able to express themselves in a kind of flowing, articulate, quotable way. For some users, we're going to be relying heavily on the behaviors that they exhibit, and they might need a little bit more coaxing to get their thoughts across. But take the time, create the space to allow people to comfortably and confidently communicate how they're thinking and feeling as you're going through the session. Offer response options. Mostly we encourage people to sort of talk their responses. That might not be the best method for everybody. So if that is the case, consider allowing people to type their responses or give them to you in a different way. This is all about adapting your approach and offering options to ensure that people can participate fully. Notice cues of fatigue. Some disabled people will experience fatigue quickly. We work with a visually impaired tester regularly who finds white glaring screens, not dissimilar to what I've got here today, to be totally honest with you, really fatigue her eyes after a little while. So notice for those cues of fatigue and offer breaks as regularly as possible, if you feel they're needed. And this is where regular check-ins come in. Through your session, check in with people, make sure that they are okay and feeling comfortable and confident to continue. The end of the session should not necessarily be the end of the relationship. Take time to follow up and say thank you. You have just experienced something truly amazing. Somebody has shared their lived experience. That is invaluable. So say thank you. Pay promptly and pay within the set out timeframes that you gave them right at the very beginning. And register repeat interest. This is a fantastic way to build up a community of people that you can continue to work with, that you can co-create with even. So make sure that you register people's repeat interest. And on the whole, almost everybody that we work with will want to work with us again, which is a fantastic testament to the way that we run research, I believe. The common mistakes, which we've covered off a little bit already, but tokenistic representation. Make sure that you are including a really diverse, broad range of people and not just one or two testers to say, oh, well, we've done it because we've included one blind person. That's not fully inclusive testing. Don't slack on the prep. Prepare to fail. No, fail to prepare, but prepare to fail. That's the way around, isn't it? So don't slack on that prep. Try not to bias the testing sessions. By creating the space and sitting in the silence, you will allow people to fully express themselves. Don't ask leading questions. Ask broad, open questions that allow people to give you their full thoughts and feelings. Don't sit on the outcomes. So once you've got this, use it. It's a fantastic load of resources and insight that you can use to improve your digital experience. And even worse, don't dismiss the findings. What you have got, again, is something so valuable. And even if it doesn't match your interpretation and mental model of the world, that's actually a really important thing to challenge yourself to ensure that you are implementing the things that make you feel a bit uncomfortable. Because where we find that discomfort, we are finding the edges of our developmental space, and we're finding growth opportunities. So don't dismiss outcomes that you don't agree with. So in summary, test early and often, include a broad range of lived experience, adapt your approach to your participants' needs, and pay participants promptly and fairly. A few extra resources, and I know we'll be sharing these slides with you afterwards, so please do head over to our blog, our podcast, and also to the fantastic organisation AbilityNet, who offer user research accreditation training for anyone looking to gain a bit more confidence in running these sorts of sessions. And thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be with you today. I hope that you've enjoyed listening, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That's really, really helpful. And we're just going to go to the questions that we've already got here. But before we do that, I'm just wondering if you could just go over the detail of those numbers that you put at the very beginning that you might want to correct yourself.
Yes, I do apologise. This is numbers are not my strong point. I am a qualitative researcher for a reason, and I think that came across there. Yeah, so I misquoted some stats right at the very beginning there when we were talking about the sort of the size of the market in which we are talking here. So I said 16 billion, which, considering that's more than double the number of people that are on the planet, it's probably not quite the right number. But what I should have said when we were talking about why it's so important to do inclusive user testing is because the stats are about 1.3 billion people worldwide. So that's sort of 16% of the global population, and that's where I got my numbers slightly mixed up. So thank you for the opportunity to correct that, Annabelle.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, first question that we have here. How do we ensure that we recruit in a representative manner, considering the range of assistive technologies available and various experience levels in using them too?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to what I talked about fairly early on in the presentation, which is around input and output diversity. And so as much as possible, what I guess we want to do within our sample is have a variety of those different input and output types. And so because we're doing qualitative testing, it is small sample sizes. So typically you're not going to have, you are going to have to be taking the insight to a certain extent. I was going to say with a pinch of salt, but that's not right. You're still getting lots of robust stuff. But what I would be suggesting to people is that you're looking to make sure you're kind of ticking off each of those different input and output variety types in some form or some combination. And when it does come to the kind of the different levels of competence, when we're using digital assistive technology, again, it depends on what the objectives of your research are. If you are really just trying to iron out as many technical accessibility barriers and challenges as possible, then ideally you probably want to be working with people who are fairly proficient at using their assistive technology, because what we want to make sure we're doing is testing where the website is falling down and kind of creating barriers, rather than where it's sort of an assistive technology user challenge. In that respect, because the more we can do to iron out those flaws in the website, the easier we're then going to make it for people who are slightly less competent at using their assistive technologies. But we are typically testing with sample sizes, as I said, of anywhere between only about 5 people. Gives you enough to kind of have one person who goes across that input output diversity through to much bigger sample sizes if the budget is available. But that is often the limiting factor, unfortunately, in most situations.
Right. Okay. One I noticed during your talk as well, you were saying that you included some figures at the beginning of your talk about the increase in sales when accessibility is addressed within the website. If you have any links to studies that the participants here could use to promote it to their clients, would you be able to include that in your follow-up notes?
Absolutely, yeah. I've got there's some really lovely research papers that support that, so I'd be very happy to share those links and people can use them.
Great. Okay. Now, next question. When we allow people to self-describe, should we at least start with a people first language approach to come across as respectful? What's your feedback on this?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that there's some global differences about people first language. So in the UK here, actually, it changes all the time, but the current slight preference is for the word, in this case, disabled people, because it identifies it links more to the social model of disability, whereas I believe in the US, it's more common to say people with disabilities. I would again just take this back to the participant, to the person that you're speaking to, ask them how they'd like to be referred to. You can begin, with one way or the other. If in your society, in your culture, people first language is currently the norm, or if it's a bit more like it is here in the UK, then what I would suggest perhaps doing some research to understand how, wherever you are, localize your language so it's appropriate for the market that you're speaking to, but then always give people the opportunity to self-describe as early as possible in that conversation to ensure that you're not making any assumptions about how they want to be referred to, in the same ways that we kind of approach pronouns and asking people how they'd like to be referred to in that respect. It's exactly the same approach when we're thinking about disability and neurodivergence.
Okay, great. And based on your experience with testings, do you recommend limiting to a device type like mobile or desktop, or simply leaving it open to the participants to decide on their preferred device?
I think there's a few things to consider here. Firstly, what are your testing objectives? So we'll often be working with people who are, perhaps they've only built mobile prototypes of what it is that we want to be testing. So in that situation, we are only going to be testing mobile. Where we are looking for a split of devices, typically we'll allow the participant to put forward a preference as to which device they would typically be most comfortable using. And then if they say they have no preference, then we will ask them to use a particular device to ensure that we're getting the right split across our cohort. So I think think about what it is that you're testing first, and then giving people the option is a really nice way to do it. But it also might then influence your recruitment strategy, who you're reaching out to, if, for example, you are only able to test on mobile because that's the prototypes that you've got.
Right. Okay. There are two questions, but I think we've only got time for one. I'm sorry, Kwaku. We will put your question to Lucy, and she can answer that after the session. But this final one, it's actually a follow-on about testing sessions. How do you recommend setting up the session based on the device do you use? For example, cameras, mics, possibly an ongoing online meeting session to allow more observers to join. How would you do that?
So as I said, we try and keep the setup as simple as possible. So we do most of our testing, remote testing, via Zoom. We will basically send someone a Zoom link, and we'll ask them to join it. What we'll then ask them to do is share their screen. And if they're a screen reader user, we'll also ask them to share their computer audio so that we at our end can hear what the screen reader is saying. That then allows us to capture obviously their screen, their webcam. If we're doing the testing on mobile, we sometimes ask them to join both on a computer and a phone, and then we'll do the screen sharing via the phone, but that allows us to keep the head and shoulders camera shot, which can be really helpful insight. And then our observers will simply just join that Zoom call. But what we ask them to do is anonymize themselves, and we ask them to keep their mics and cameras switched off so they're not interfering or disturbing the session or engaging with the tester in any way during that. The one limitation of that is when we do testing with people who use screen magnification software, is unfortunately that does not get pulled through in a screen share. And that's because of the way that the technology is kind of impacting the screen at their end. So in that situation, when we're moderating that remotely, what we'll ask the tester to do is really to describe what it is that they can see on their screen. But wherever possible, we try and do that sort of testing in person because it's really great insight.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. It's been a really great session. And thank you as well for attending this session with Lucy Collins. You can continue your conversation on social media using the hashtags that you can see in the lobby. Hashtag, I'll give you just one of them for now, WPAD 2025. And you can go and do the feedback as well. It's anonymous feedback for our speakers in the presentation. The URL for that is 2025.wpaccessibility.day. accessibility.org/feedback. And you can enter to win a t-shirt while you're there. So stay tuned for Accessibility Isn't Extra Work, it's Risk Management. Coming up next with Jennifer Wierczak, yes, that's it, at 8 a.m. UTC. And while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab virtual swag and enter for a chance to win great prizes. See you right here after the break.